Hello, I wish you have a good time. This is the second session for training teachers for teaching some of the skills, teaching vocab and spelling for primary schools and beginners. Let's go. Why shouldn't we memorize vocabulary? Students' memory has limited capacity, so if you ask students to memorize some words, they will only remember the first group of the words and they will not be able to recall the other groups of words. If students do not frequently recall vocabulary, students will forget them. So it's much better to ask them to read the vocabulary so they keep recalling the vocabulary. But if you ask them to memorize them and they stop reading, they will not see the words again and they will not be able to recall the vocabulary. Vocabulary cannot be taught in isolation. If you teach students vocabulary in isolation, you do not help them to improve their level of the language. You do not develop the language. You just keep tying the target language with the mother tongue so they can just remember the equivalent in their mother tongue and they do not develop the English language or the target language. Teaching vocabulary could badly affect the structure. Yes, if you are going to teach them in isolation, vocabulary in isolation, that will not help them to form sentences. They will know the words in isolation. Asking students to write words more than once is fruitless, actually, but for amending handwriting, yes, this will not help them to remember anything because they can write and their minds are absent. So it will not help unless you need to improve their handwriting. These are the 5 programs for teaching vocabulary and spelling, or 5 techniques and strategies. Number 1, vocabulary classification. Number 2, cards and lists. Number 3, dictionary work. And number 4, meaningful sentences. And number 5, spelling games. Number 1, vocabulary classification. This is so much related to reading. After they read, you ask them to do the following and the following procedures, but let's see the objectives first. The objectives to help students to work mentally on vocabulary to be able to build the structure correctly. Yes, you do not give them the words in isolation, you give them the words in context, in text. The observation the teacher should make: students' ability to read correctly. They need to read correctly in order to comprehend. And number 2, students' ability to distinguish between different parts of speech. This is very important to be able to classify. What are the procedures to do this? Number 1, students read to point out nouns, verbs, prepositions, adjectives. You ask students to point out nouns, verbs, prepositions, adjectives, whatever, pronouns. Then you ask them to classify the groups of vocabulary into classification table. For example, a list for verbs, a list for nouns, a list for pronouns, and so on. Number 3, students use the table to form meaningful phrases and sentences. You ask them to reuse the words they have in new meaningful sentence of their own. They should not repeat the sentence in the passage. Number 4, students write some of the vocabulary on cards to be used in the classroom, so they will help you, they will provide you with aids for the other classes by taking this. Instead of writing them in their notebook, you ask them to write them separately in cards, on cards, so you can use them again. Teacher chooses students who will write the vocabulary. You can give tasks. For example, 3 students will write the nouns, other students will write the verbs of the passage, from the passage, other will write the pronouns, and so on, adjectives, and so on. Cards and lists. Now you have cards, you made cards, so you have to make good use of them. And the problem with lists is that most of the students and people, actually teachers, actually believe that lists are dull. Actually, lists are not dull, but the way we use lists are dull. Some certain vocabulary of English could be more effective for language acquisition than others, like Dutch sight words. Dutch sight words telling us about how can they seeing the word for more than once. That will help them if they build a connection with the vocabulary and words with each other. The objectives of this is to help students to be able to identify vocabulary and use them regularly and correctly in a competitive atmosphere. The observation the teacher should make: students' ability to recall and remember. What are the procedures? Using cards procedures. Number one, you distribute the cards. You give them the cards of the vocabulary. Every student should take one card. Then you ask students to read each word for 10 times. They will be like beehive. And then you ask students to cover the words or hide the words and recall the words. Then you can ask one of the students to come out and to guess what is the covered word with his friend, what is the covered word with another student. And so if he get the right guessing, he will be a winner. You can also ask students to read the cards up, and when they raise the cards up, you can ask the students in front of them about the word that they have. For example, give me the opposite of this one, which word of them means this, and so you can work on the vocab on the cards with one student, with one by one. Students exchange the cards and repeat the previous activities. You can ask them to exchange cards together and do this again. Using lists effectively. Students look at the lists on a screen or even on a board or written by the teacher, are asked to point out some certain vocabulary per word. You can ask two of the students to come out and tell them, give me the word which means, give me the word which means, give me the word which means, give me the opposite of this word, give me 5 words starting with S, 5 words starting with K, with L, and so on. Students use the lists to form correct sentences. You ask them to form correct sentences and meaningful sentences of their own. Students use the lists to fill in spaces. You can give them a form with the spaces and you ask them to look at the list and fill in the spaces they have. A word on the board. Students lists to give a word which means. After you finish the lesson, this is a good game for assessment. You ask them which word on the board means, and so on. The vocabulary race. You can ask 2 students to go to the end of the classroom, and when you say the word, they run and they write the word, and the faster is the winner, with the correct spelling, of course. Dictionary work. The dictionary work actually is very important for students and can develop the sense of the language to students. The objectives of this is to help students to learn about the different forms of the word, parts of speech. The observation the teacher should make: students' ability to use spelling correctly to reach words and search. If they are able to spell the word correctly and to reach the word, this will also help students to develop the ability to search. Students' ability to distinguish between different classes, prefixes, suffixes, and so on. This will this could happen when you ask students to do a very short and brief presentation about one word, and he used the word map, and they do a very short presentation about one word. The procedures. Students use dictionaries to read words and transcription. Yes, you help them to always to use the dictionary. You don't give them the answers easily. You ask them to look up the words. Students classify words according to their parts of the speech. This is very important. After they point out, they build their own glossary by classifying the words. Students write similar examples of the words as in the dictionary. They can also write similar sentences giving an example to clarify the meaning of the word. Students perform a simple presentation for a word and its different forms, as I said, with a type of word map or something, so he can use the word produce, production, producing, product, and so on. Meaningful sentences. You always have to ask the students to use the sentences meaningfully, to use the words meaningfully in a sentence they make, they create, and should be related to the real life. Students use vocabulary to form correct, simple, and long sentences. Teachers give students recent feedback to correct their sentences. He never stops them, but he always corrects the sentence they produce and monitors them. Students avoid writing the same sentences of the passage, of course. You have to ask them to create their own sentences. Students use the given vocabulary to form a real daily life activity. This is very important, and you help them to produce sentences related to the classroom, to the school, to the activities during the day. Students get the habit to read the sentences they form and write. If they have a problem with speaking, you can ask them to write, and when they are writing, you ask them after this to read. They will speak and they will monitor their mistakes, and this will help them a lot. Spelling games. Actually, we have many different spelling games. Objectives of this is to students' outcomes should be more fruitful when they enjoy the process of learning within competitive atmosphere. The observations the teacher should make, students' accuracy, handwriting habits. Procedures. Number one, in-out games. In-out games, you can just give them 5 points or 5 spaces, and you ask them to guess the letters one by one. And if they say the right word, you write until they reach the correct spelling of the word. And will be good for them to remember the spelling. The word puzzle, you can give them a word puzzle, and you ask them to point out certain words written for them, and you ask them to find them in the word puzzle, and this will help them also to care about spelling and to observe spelling. Spelling cards. Students use cards to fill in the spaces. As you do with words, you can put letters on cards, and you ask them to put the correct letter to complete the space, or to supply in the missing part in the sentence. Number four, folded cards. You can hide the cards, and students guess the folded card that match the words suggested by teacher. This is helping them for vocabulary and for